light handy. The natural sunlight coming in from the window is way too bright. So book light it is. And just as a recap, we read the first 2 chapters. It briefly went into the sale of the home to George and Kathy Lutz and their family priest coming to bless the home and being less than welcome by whatever was inhabiting the property. Alright folks, here we go. Chapter 3, December 19th to the 21st. Sorry, this is gonna look so fucking annoying in the camera. I'm sorry guys. Here, I'll try to move it down. George sat up in bed wide awake. He had heard a knock on his front door. He looked around in the darkness, and for a moment, he didn't know where he was. But then it came to him. He was in the master bedroom of his new home. Kathy was there beside him, hunched down under the warm covers. The knock came again. Jesus, who's that? He muttered. George reached for his wristwatch on the night table. It was 3:15 a.m. in the morning. Again, a loud rapping. Only this time, it didn't sound as if it was coming from downstairs, more from somewhere off to his left. George got out of bed, padded across the cold, uncarpeted floor of the hallway, and into the sewing room that faced the Amityville River in the back. He looked out the window into the darkness. He heard another knock. George strained his eyes to see. Where the hell's Harry? Well, if you all remember from the last chapter we read, he left Harry chained up in the yard like an asshole. From somewhere over his head came a sharp crack. Instinctively, he ducked, then looked up at the ceiling. He heard a low squeak. The boys, Danny and Chris, were on the floor above him. One of them must have pushed a toy off his bed in his sleep. Barefooted and wearing only his pajama pants, George was shivering now. He looked back out the window. There, something was moving down by the boathouse. He quickly lifted the window, and the freezing air hit him full blast. Hey, who's out there? Then Harry barked and moved. George, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, saw the dog spring to his feet. The shadow was close to Harry. Harry, go get him. Another rap sounded from the direction of the boathouse, and Harry spun around at the noise. He began running back and forth in the compound, barking furiously now, the lead holding him back. George slammed the window shut and ran back to his bedroom. Kathy had awoken. What's the matter? She turned on the lamp on her was still barking at the moving shadow. There was a length of 2x4 lumber lying against the swimming pool fence. George grabbed it and ran toward the boathouse. Then he saw the shadow move. His grip tightened on the heavy stick. Another loud rap. Damn! George saw it was the door to the boathouse opened and swinging in the wind. I thought I'd locked that before. Harry barked again. Oh, shut up, Harry, knock it off. A half hour later, George was back in bed, still wide awake. As an ex-Marine, not too many years out of the service, he was fairly accustomed to emergency wake-up calls. It was taking him time to turn off his inner alarm system. Waiting for sleep to return, he considered what he had gotten himself into. A second marriage. 3 children. Sorry guys, the page turning is loud. A new house with a big mortgage. The taxes in Amityville were 3 times higher than in Deer Park. Did he really need that new speedboat? How the hell was he going to pay for all of this? The construction business was lousy on Long Island because of the tight mortgage money, and it didn't look like it would be getting better until the banks loosened up. If they are building houses and buying property, who the hell needs a land surveyor? Excuse me, folks, sorry. Kathy shifted in her sleep. Good Lord, I don't know what the hell's wrong with me today. Anyway, Kathy shifted in her sleep so that her arm fell across George's neck. Her face burrowed deep into his chest. He sniffed her hair. She certainly smelled clean, he thought, and he liked that. And she kept her children the same way, spotless. Her kids, George's now. Whatever the trouble, she and the children were worth it. George looked up at the ceiling. Danny was a good boy, into everything. He could handle almost anything you gave him to do. They were getting closer now. Danny was now beginning to call his stepfather Dad. No more George. In a way, he was glad he never got to meet Kathy's ex-husband. This way he felt Danny was all his. Kathy said that Chris looked just like his father, had the same ways about him, the same dark curly hair and eyes. George would reprimand the boy for something, and Chris's face would fall, and he'd look up at him with those soulful eyes. The kid sure knew how to use them. He liked the way both boys looked after little Missy. She was a little terror, but smart for a 5-year-old. He'd never had any trouble with her from the first day he met Kathy. She was a daddy's girl, all right. Listens to Kathy and me. In fact, they all do. They're 3 nice kids I've got. It was after 6 before George finally fell into a deep sleep. Kathy woke up a few minutes later. She looked around this strange room, trying to put her thoughts together. She was in the bedroom of her beautiful new home. Her husband was next to her, and her 3 children were in their own bedrooms. Wasn't that marvelous? God had been good to them. Kathy tried to slip easily from under George's arm. Sorry. The poor man worked so hard yesterday, she thought, and today he's got more ahead of him. Let him sleep. She still dark outside, she turned on the light. Boxes of her dishes, glasses, and pots were piled up all over the floor and sink. Chairs were still sitting on top of the dinette table, but she smiled to herself. The kitchen was going to be a happy room for her family. It might be just the place for her transcendental meditation, which George had been practicing for 2 years. Kathy, for one. He had been into TM ever since the breakup of his first marriage, when he had been attending sessions of a group therapy. Out of that grew his interest in meditation. He had introduced Kathy to the subject, but now, with all the work of moving in, he had completely ignored his established pattern of going off by himself into a room and meditating for a few minutes each day. Kathy washed out her electric percolator, filled it, plugged it in, and lit her first cigarette of the day. Drinking coffee, Kathy sat at the table with a pad and pencil, making notes for herself on the jobs to be done around the house. Today was the 19th of Friday. The kids would not go to their new school until after the Christmas holidays. Christmas. There was still so much to do. Kathy sensed someone was staring at her. Startled, she looked up and over her shoulder. Her little daughter was standing in the doorway. "Missy, you scared me half to death. What's the matter? What are you doing up so early?" The little girl's eyes were half closed. Her blonde hair hung across her face. She looked around as if not understanding where she was. "I want to go home, Mama." "You are home, Missy. This is our new home. Come here." Missy shambled over to Kathy and climbed up on her mother's lap. The two ladies of the house sat there in their pleasant kitchen, Kathy rocking her daughter back to sleep. George came down after 9. By that time, the boys had already finished their breakfast and were outside playing with Harry, investigating everything. Missy was asleep again in her room. Kathy looked at her husband, whose big frame filled the doorway. She saw he hadn't shaved below his jawbone, and that his dark blonde hair and beard were still uncombed. That meant he hadn't showered. "What's the matter? Aren't you going to work?" George sat down wearily at the table. "Nope, I still have to unload the truck and get it back out to Deer Park. We blew an extra $50 by keeping it overnight." He looked around, yawning, and shivered. "It's cold in here. Don't you have the heat on?" The boys ran past the kitchen door, yelling at Harry. George looked up. "What's the matter with those two? Can't you keep them quiet, Kathy?" She turned from the sink. "Well, don't bark at me. You're their father. You know, you do it." George slapped his open palm down on the table. The sharp sound made Kathy jump. "Right," he shouted. George opened the kitchen door and leaned out. Danny, Chris, and Harry, whooping it up, ran by was exhausted from putting things away and trying to keep the kids away from George. She started cleaning the bathrooms in the morning. She figured, but that was it for tonight. She was going to bed. George stayed down in the living room, feeding log after log into the roasting fireplace. Even though the thermostat read 75 degrees, he couldn't seem to get warm. He must have checked the oil burner in the basement a dozen times during the day and evening. At 12, George finally dragged himself up to the bedroom and fell asleep immediately. At 3:15 in the morning, he was wide awake again, sitting up in bed. There was something on his mind. The boathouse. Did he lock the door? He couldn't remember. He had to go out and check. It was closed and locked up. Over the next 2 days, the Lutz family began to go through a collective personality change. As George said, it was not a big thing, just little bits and pieces here and there. He didn't shave or shower, something he did religiously. Normally, George devoted as much time to his business as he could. 2 years before, he had a second office in Shirley to handle contractors farther out on the South Shore. But now he simply called Syosset and gave gruff orders to his men, demanding they finish some surveying jobs over the weekend because he needed the money. As for arranging to move his office to his new basement, he never gave it another thought. Instead, George constantly complained that the house was like a refrigerator and he had to warm it up. Stuffing more and more logs in the fireplace occupied almost his every moment, except for the times he would go back out to the boathouse, stare into space, then go back to the house. Even now, he can't say what he was looking for when he went there. He just knew that somehow he was drawn to the place. It was practically a compulsion. The third night in the house, he again woke at 3:15 a.m., worried about what might be going on out there. The children bothered him too. Ever since the move, they seemed to have become brats, misbehaved monsters who wouldn't listen, unruly children who must be severely punished. When it came to the children, Kathy fell into the same mood. She was tense from her strained relationship with George and from the efforts of trying to put her house in shape before Christmas. On their fourth night in the house, she exploded and together with her husband, beat Danny, Chris, and Missy with a strap and a large, heavy wooden spoon. The children had accidentally cracked a pane of glass in the playroom's half-moon window. My apologies if you guys can hear the cars going by. Chapter 4, December 22nd. Early Monday morning, it was bitter cold in Amityville. The town is right on the Atlantic side of Long Island, and the sea wind blew in like a nor'easter. The thermometer hovered at 8 degrees, and media weathermen were forecasting a white Christmas. Inside 112 Ocean Avenue, Danny, Chris, and Missy Lutz were up in the playroom, slightly subdued from the whipping the night before. George had still not gone to his office and was sitting in the living room, adding more logs to the blazing fire. Kathy was writing at her dinette table in the kitchen nook. As she worked over a list of things to buy for Christmas, her concentration wandered. She was upset about having hit the children, particularly the way George and she had gone about it. There were many gifts the Lutz family still hadn't bought, and Kathy knew she had to go out and get them. But since they had moved in, she never had any desire to leave the house. She had just written down her Aunt Teresa's name when Kathy froze, pencil in midair. Something had come up from behind and embraced her. Then it took her hand and gave it a pat. The touch was reassuring and had an inner strength to it. Kathy was startled but not frightened. It was like the touch of a mother giving comfort to her daughter. Kathy had the impression of a woman's soft hand resting on her own. "Mommy, come up here quick." It was Chris calling from the third floor hallway. Kathy looked up. The spell was broken. The touch was gone. She ran up the stairs to her children. They were in their bathroom, looking into the toilet. Kathy saw the inside of the bowl was absolutely black, as though someone had painted it from the bottom to the edge just below the rim. She pushed the handle, flushing clear water against the sides. The black remained. Kathy grabbed toilet paper and tried vainly to rub off the discoloration. "I don't believe it. I just scrubbed this yesterday with Clorox." She turned accusingly to the children. "Did you throw any paint in here?" "Oh no, Mama," all three chorused. Kathy was fit to be tied. The incident in the breakfast nook was forgotten. She looked into the sink in the bathtub, but they were still gleaming from her scouring. She turned on the faucets. Nothing but clear running water. Once more she flushed the toilet, not really expecting the horrible black color to disappear. She bent down and looked around the base to see if anything was leaking through the inside of the bowl. Finally, she turned to Danny. "Get the Clorox from my bathroom. It's in the little closet under the sink." Missy started to go. "Missy, you stay here. Let Danny get it." The boy left the bathroom. "And bring the scrub brush too," Kathy called after him. Chris searched his mother's face, his eyes watering. "I didn't do it. Please don't hit me again." Kathy looked at him, thinking of the terrible night before. "No, baby, it wasn't your fault. Something's happened to the water, I think. Maybe some oil backed up in the line. Didn't you notice it before?" "I had to go. I saw it first," crowed Missy. Well, let's see what the Clorox does before I call your father and he—" "Mama, Mama!" The cry came from down the hall. Kathy leaned out the bathroom doorway. "What is it, Danny?" I said. "It's under the sink." "No, Mama, I found it, but the black's in your toilet too, and it stinks in here." Kathy's bathroom door was at the far end of her bedroom. Danny was standing outside the bedroom, holding his nose, when Kathy and the other two children came running down. As soon as Kathy stepped into the bedroom, the odor hit her. A sweetish, not Swedish, sweetish perfume smell. She stopped, sniffed, and frowned. "What the hell is that? That isn't my cologne." But when she entered her bathroom, she was struck by a completely different odor, an overpowering stench. Kathy gagged and started to cough, but before she ran, caught a glimpse of her toilet bowl. It was totally black inside. The children scrambled out of her way as she headed down the stairs. "George, what voice. "George, look at this. The fourth bedroom on the second floor, now Kathy's sewing room, has two windows. One which looks out at the boathouse and the Amityville River was the window George had opened that first night when he had awakened at 3:15. The other window faces the neighboring house to the right of 112 Ocean Avenue. On this window, clinging to the inside of the panes, were literally hundreds of buzzing flies. Jesus, will you look at that? Houseflies now. Maybe they're attracted by the smell," Kathy volunteered. "Yeah, but not this time of year. Flies don't live that long, and not in this weather. And why are they only on this window?" George looked around the room, trying to see where the insects had come from. There was a closet in one corner. He opened the door and peered in, looking for cracks, for anything that would make sense. If this closet wall was up against the bathroom, they might have lived in the warmth, but this wall's against the outside. George put his hand against the plaster. "It's cold in here. I don't see any way they could have survived." After shooing his family out into the hall, George shut the door of the sewing room. He opened the other window overlooking the boathouse, then took some newspaper and chased out as many flies as he could. He killed those that remained, then he closed the window. By then it was freezing on the second floor, but at least the sweet perfume odor was gone. The bathroom stench had also diminished. This didn't help George in his efforts to warm the home. No one else was complaining. He checked the oil heating system in the basement. It was working fine. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the thermostat just off the living room read 80 degrees, but George couldn't feel the heat. Kathy had scrubbed the toilet bowls again with Clorox, Fantastic, and Lysol. The cleaners helped George took him into the kitchen and introduced Kathy. The man stood there and repeated his speech to her. Kathy nodded. He continued by telling the Lutzes that he kept his boat at another neighbor's boathouse, several doors down on Ocean Avenue. The man held on to the six-pack and finally said, "I brought it. I'll take it with me," and left. George and Kathy never found out his name.